Welcome to today's webinar. I'm very happy to be here with you and thank you so much for joining. We are going to be talking about the Westminster Accounts, how Tortoise used Flourish to build that story, and also how they use Flourish in their day-to-day journalism at Tortoise. My name is Louisa. I'm a product manager at Flourish, and our very special guest today is Katie. Welcome, Katie. Would you like to
Hello.
say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Katie. I'm the data editor at Tortoise, and I'm excited to talk about how we use Flourish.
Awesome. A fun bit of trivia for some of our guests in this webinar is that you may actually recognize Katie's name if you are a long-standing Flourish user, because Katie used to work at Flourish. Didn't
I
you?
did,
Yeah,
yes.
good
Yeah, so
old
if you
times.
are a long-time sort of newsroom user, it's possible that we've communicated over email quite a few years ago now, but yeah.
Very exciting to welcome you back from the other side. And thanks for being here with us.
Of course.
So today's session, we're going to be looking at Katie's story, the Westminster Accounts. It's an investigation that she worked on together with her team at Tortoise and Sky News. We're going to dive into her data storytelling process. So kind of how did the story idea come about and how did they structure their work on it? We're going to look at how Tortoise uses Flourish in their newsroom for their day-to-day work. And then we're also going to look into designing and building a bespoke template with the Flourish SDK, which is actually how they built the Westminster Accounts story. And as Mafe already mentioned, there will be a Q&A at the end. Feel free to pop your questions in the chat throughout already, and we might be able to pick some up as we go through the slides. And with that, I will hand over to you, Katie, to talk us through the Westminster Accounts. What are they? Why did you work on them? What problems are they solving, etc.?
Cool. Thank you, Louisa. So the Westminster Accounts is a project that my newsroom Tortoise worked on in conjunction with Sky News. So a team at Tortoise and a team at Sky News worked together on reporting and putting out stories, but my team at Tortoise is the one that actually really built the tool and did the data work on the back end. So in its most basic form, the Westminster Accounts as a database of money flowing into British politics, specifically into Westminster. And that is sort of the data end of it, which we use for reporting and, data stories and stuff like that. But there's also a publicly available kind of front end tool or story. It's kind of a story and a tool put together that we launched in January, and that is what we use the Flourish SDK. It's kind of a mouthful to build. And the other thing you should know about the Westminster Accounts, I guess, is that it's an ongoing project. So it's being updated with each new register that it pulls data from every time there's a new register, and we're going to keep updating it, I think, at least through the next general election. Yeah.
Awesome.
So why did we work on this Westminster Accounts? This is kind of quite in the weeds, I think, but I think it's interesting nonetheless. So the idea originated for the entire project with the expenses scandal, which some people at Sky News worked on, some people, including my boss at Tortoise, famously they didn't work on. So they were kind of looking for their own expenses scandal, and the register of members' financial interests, which is basically the register where MPs have to declare all of their financial interests, is sort of infamously hard to read, hard to deal with. The data is infamously bad. And that was really the kind of genesis of the project. So, and yeah, so transparency doesn't equal accessibility is sort of a buzz phrase that we came up with. But the data's out there, but it's not very easy to get to or to use or to put together. And that was sort of the basis of the project.
So even though today we're here to kind of talk about the visual output of this investigation and how you use Flourish to visualize that, at the heart of this story was actually gathering all that data from all those different sources.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much a case of the data was out there publicly, technically, but it was not put together in a way that made it possible to use, and we did all the connecting.
Awesome.
So yeah, and that is all of this plays to that as well. So the data spread across separate public records. It was basically just free text, unstructured. A lot of it is data that humans enter every month, and then update every month. So, names are misspelled, dates are not in the same format, all of that kind of stuff, which made the project difficult, but also fun.
And rewarding in the end, because you've created this unique database of databases that wasn't really created before.
Exactly. Database of databases. Yes. I feel like we've used that phrase. But yeah, it is a database of databases, basically.
Well, let's take a look, shall we? I'm just going to jump across to this other tab that I have prepared. And maybe you can walk me through. This is the Westminster Accounts tool or story or both, as you said. And the way that it works is that we can just enter our postcode or our MP. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the Flourish offices, which are located in the London postcode N1.
I think it has to be a 6-digit postcode.
Okay.
Well, so if you just click on Yvette Cooper there at the top, this is sort of randomly going through MPs. Yeah, so the first part of the tool is scrolling, and this is like kind of this disclaimer that you get the first time you visit it. So that we added largely for legal reasons. And then now you're into the actual tool itself, and it's kind of like a scrolly telling story. We called these circular, like circles inside of other circles, kind of visualization. Ended up calling it like a petri dish, because that's kind of what it looks like. Yeah. And you're just getting information about your MP, or in this case, James Davis. That's a lot. That's actually a lot of donations. Often if you just click on one of the random people, what comes up is a completely empty circle because they haven't gotten any. But you got a good one.
Nice. Yeah. So we're being taken through this story, and we're seeing all the donations that he received, and this has been done for each and every MP specifically.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of data.
Yeah. It is.
But I believe you linked it up via Google Sheet, isn't that right?
Yeah, so that is actually, I would say, in my opinion, one of Flourish's best kind of features is that ability to hook data up virtually through an external URL, because it means you can push stuff to Google Sheets or amend things in Google Sheets or anywhere else up, whatever CSV or whatever you have up on a URL somewhere, and then you don't actually have to go back into Flourish necessarily to update it, which is nice.
Yeah, that's great. It's crazy to realize that so much data for each of these MPs, we have kind of one of these visualizations, and all the data from that is living in a Google Sheet and then flowing into that Flourish template. And then so here it is.
Yeah, this is the kind of explore tool, as we called it, at the end. and it lets you kind of search around, and it'll highlight different MPs and different parties, different donors. You can also see, like, you know, a party's members and stuff like that, or different sources. Oh, wow.
Wow.
That
Lord
is,
David Sainsbury.
I think that's new that he's at the top there. That's interesting.
Crazy.
Like I said, it's updating. So I'm not always completely up to date on like who's actually at the top of
Yeah.
rankings and stuff.
How often do you update it?
It's about every 2 weeks. So the separate registers are the Register of Members' Interests, the Register of APPGs, and then the sort of Electoral Commission puts out a sort of database of a data set of all of the donations to parties every quarter. And then the other two are about every 2 weeks or every month, but it depends. It's not regular, completely regular.
So another complex
yeah,
timing issue to add to the mix.
yes.
Okay.
And they will not tell you when they're going to release the register, because we have asked and they said they wouldn't tell us.
Wow. And yet you prevailed and you created this amazing tool that allows us to explore where our MPs are getting their money from.
Yep. Just
Fascinating.
hitting refresh on the
So
Parliament website.
thank you so much for walking us through that. I would now like to talk a little bit more about the process behind the creation of the Westminster Accounts. So how did you go from chaos to clarity? How did the idea come about? I know you already touched on this. You have a couple of slides kind of showing different stages of the project. So yeah, it'd be great if you could take us through those next.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I've already touched on that a little bit, but the data itself is quite chaotic. So there's, you know, on the one side of the project, there's the data collection and cleaning and analysis, and automation. And we did a lot of manual checking, which is really a double-edged sword because, you know, you sometimes have to write checks to check that the person who actually manually checked something didn't make a mistake, and then have another person check their work. Like, it's anyway. So the data is very chaotic, and on the front end, because the data itself is so chaotic and doesn't really fit together that nicely, just kind of figuring out how to display it was also very chaotic. So we went through a lot of designs. Like, I'm about to show you maybe 3 or 4 slides of designs, and this doesn't even touch on the things that we've designed, really. So if you look there in the bottom left corner, that was like one of my first attempts at like just designing something. And it's kind of, if anyone knows the gov.uk website very well, which same, is kind of a mock-up of the gov.uk website, which we ended up deciding would probably get us sued. So we definitely didn't do that. But that was kind of like a really, really early design. And then our first kind of aesthetic that we were thinking about was this like multicolored thing, which we quite quickly threw out when you see the next slide. But we also started off with squares, where each square, and then onto more early designs, these are slightly later, but each square represented a donation. And the idea was that we were going to like switch between squares being colored by their value versus them being sized by their value, which was technically quite tricky, but looked cool and looked very different than anything anybody else did. But so yeah, and this was also back when we were the original idea was we were only going to do the data that included like the MP's data. We weren't going to have the party data and the APPG data as well. So it was more simple in a lot of ways. But yeah.
It's amazing to see all these iterations. They're all just visually stunning.
Yeah. How many people worked on this project? So I'm just like looking at the chat. Actually, I guess we'll wait till we go to the end. But yeah, this is another iteration, which was really crazy. If you look in the top center, that kind of flow looking diagram was us kind of attempting to map out different journeys, which got real complicated real quickly. And yeah, these are all a bit crazy. I had this kind of terrible idea to do some sort of chat bot, which is kind of pulled from the Apple notifications like panel on that far right one, which you can kind of see, which did not work out. Yeah.
Wow. In this example here, I'm curious, what are the different colors? Are those like, oh, are these the APPGs and then the MPs and then the parties?
Yeah, I think it was like green was the APPGs, yellow was the MPs, and purple was, and some of these purple and some of them pink were the parties. The real hard thing with data like this is finding a way to show the big picture and also things in detail and making it easy to kind of navigate around. And so we kind of always refer to it as a map view. And then like a more detailed view on like a single MP or a single APPG, or being able to see donations to from the same people across all those was really, really difficult to kind of get the UX of that down. It kind of almost drove us mad, so this is I feel slightly vulnerable showing you sketches like this because they're all horrible. But there were a lot of points in this project, and one or two in particular, where we really kind of like tried to throw it all away and start again. And so some of this, like if you look at the one on the bottom that's like a sticky note, was like when we did one of those like, design thinking things where you just come up with like crazy ideas for 15 minutes, write them on Post-it notes and like stick them on a wall or whatever. And like this is something someone came up with, was just almost doesn't make any sense.
Full or part full cups of water or buckets for entries.
For entities, yeah. And then actually the one in the top right is also like was supposed to be some sort of like gumball machine. I drew that. Yeah, they're really it was fun going back through all of our sketches for this a little bit. It was a little
That's so fun. So one of the kind of ways you went about it was to have a workshop where everyone tried to come up with crazy out of the box ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was driven mostly out of desperation, but yeah.
Okay, and then yeah, here we can see the kind of squares idea, and then this one looks quite like what we ended up with. And I definitely see the Petri dish here. Yeah,
the sketches that, it's harder to make things look like more organic when you're actually coding them, but which is why what we ended up with looked less like a Petri dish, but all the sketches that we did were kind of like really looked like Petri dishes.
Amazing. And then here we also have a little network graph.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's incredible to see into your process and to see all those ideas. And I love the use of kind of pen and paper on a notebook. Is that something that you often find yourself coming back to? Sorry, I'll just go back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do that every day, basically, or often. I literally have a notebook right next to me right now. But yeah, it's usually just easier if you're trying to kind of get your head around how you're gonna make something look to start drawing it out. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for that insight. And we're going to take a step away from the Westminster Accounts just for a moment Oh, I see Mafe is joining us. Is there a question?
Yes, hello. I just figured that since we're going to be moving into the Flourish app, would it be a good time maybe to go over a couple of questions that have popped up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had the chat in a different window, so I haven't been following it.
No, no worries. I mean, it's hard to do both at the same time, by all means. I just spotted a question, very quick one about the number of people working on the project. I think that Katie also picked up on that, but I figured it would be a good one to maybe answer so people have an idea of the scale and the team that went behind this process.
Yeah, I also feel slightly vulnerable here talking about the number of people that worked on it, because it was a smaller team than you would think, probably. We had two people. So we had, I'm trying to like think. So in terms of the actual tools, the reporting I would say is separate because we did use this data and the tool itself as well to do reporting. But in terms of the tool and the data, the back end, so like the data pulling and cleaning and putting it all together, was mainly one person from Tortoise, my colleague Joe, and I helped him a bit in terms of like writing back end code and doing stuff like that, and back end architecture. And then we had one or two other people on the data who were manually checking things. We manually checked every single thing that's in the tool. And then on the front end, we had sort of a couple of people who were designers at Tortoise, help with some of the designing stuff, but the actual building was kind of split across two developers who we work with, who are not actually in-house at Tortoise, but are very close to Tortoise. And then I also helped a bit on the front end as well.
I'm conscious of time, so I can see like more questions popping, so I think I'm going to save them for the Q&A. So I'll disappear again. Please carry on. This is being incredibly interesting.
Yeah, same. I'm tempted to ask follow-up questions myself because I'm amazed that there's not more people involved. But again, we'll leave that for the Q&A and just quickly talk about using Flourish at Tortoise day to day, and kind of how you use it within your newsroom, even when you're not working on these large scale investigations. So in the run up to the webinar, you told me that on most days you can find a Flourish graphic on the Tortoise homepage. And indeed, there was one there today. I just had a look before the webinar. It's this nice stacked area chart visualizing the refugee numbers in Sudan since the start of the conflict. And then we also have the Westminster Accounts linked there. And I would just love to hear more about how this day-to-day process looks, who kind of decides which charts will end up on the homepage. Is that you? How many people are on your team? How do you kind of split the work between you? And also, how does the use of Flourish fit into that process?
Yeah, so we have a chart. We have sort of a daily, it's called slow numbers internally, but we don't actually put that anywhere. We have a daily like piece of data journalism on the homepage that like as a graphic specifically. And that changes every day. We pitch those like at some point during the day before. And usually it's a Flourish embed because it's such a small space that it's kind of hard to do anything super, super detailed. So it's often kind of a very simple Flourish graphic, or something simple that has been made kind of out of Flourish. But yeah, it's usually a Flourish graphic. And then we use Flourish a lot. I mean, my team is at this point in time mostly me. We are hiring though. Yeah, so I will pop my email in the chat at some point. But yeah, it's mainly me. And I use Flourish all the time. I mean, like Louisa said, I used to work at Flourish, so I feel like I might not use it like a normal person because I'm so used to using it. But a lot of stuff, even if we make kind of more custom graphics that are really annotated, start in Flourish. Yeah,
Nice. So it's mostly you at this point.
it's mostly me.
The
Yeah,
pitching, the coming up with what it's going to be about, and also
Yeah.
the creation. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, and definitely pop that job ad in the chat at some point. Would love to get you some help in doing all this amazing work. Just quickly before we head back to the Westminster Accounts, I just wanted to showcase what kind of having a team in Flourish looks like, and what collaboration can look like as well. These are just two screenshots of kind of Katie's company. So we can see there's the company homepage with all the users inside the company, the latest visualizations that have been published, and you can see that there's also approval policies. Tortoise does not seem to have one set up, but maybe that's because Katie is the main user at this point. And then here's an example of the Flourish editor where I was having a peek yesterday in your account, or the day before, and you were visualizing the outcome of the Turkish election. So maybe this was also used in the slow numbers daily chart. Is this correct?
Yeah, that was the one from, I think, yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm about to post the job ad in the chat.
Awesome.
And my email.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then you already mentioned one of your favorite features, which was linking to a publicly readable CSV file, which can also be a Google Sheet. We can actually see a little preview of what that looks like here. It's accessible via our upload data button and is one of our premium features. I'm also shouting out to free features that you mentioned to me while prepping for this webinar that you really enjoy and that not everyone might be aware of. So could you maybe tell me a little bit about this one, which is referring to merging data sets in Flourish, how you use that and why you like it?
Yeah, so this is basically like an alternative to, in Excel or Sheets doing like a lookup table, like a VLOOKUP or a XLOOKUP or match and search, index match, whatever. Or doing like a merge with Python or with R. Sometimes I don't want to pull out like a Jupyter notebook or a R notebook or whatever, just to kind of merge two data sets and see if they have common rows or how many rows are common or how many of them I need to clean to make sure that they do merge. So I'll just throw it into Flourish. It works really well with maps. But yeah, it's quite useful. And then the unpivoting is really useful as well. It's basically, it kind of is the same thing where you don't want to pull out any code or anything like that, just to kind of transform a data set from wide to long. And I do that all the time in Flourish as well. It just kind of means that it's often, the way that I usually use it is it's often I'm working on a graphic or like I'm exploring data inside of Flourish in one of the templates, and I realize that the data is not in exactly the right format. So instead of having to kind of jump out and go to something else and then put it back in, you can kind of do all of that inside of Flourish, which is nice.
Yeah, so both of these are more like data manipulation features that you find really handy. And I might actually just take a minute to show you where they are located in the editor in case you're keen to try them out as well. The first one is, please ignore my very messy page. The first one is the unpivoting. So as you mentioned, Katie, some charts have a wide data format, such as our Line-Bar Pie template, where we have each column is a different category in this case. But if I were to want to create a scatter plot, for example, that actually has a different data format where the entity is actually in one column rather than separate columns. So in that case, we can actually just combine our columns by selecting them and right-clicking and saying combine columns on pivot, and then it will be transformed into the correct format. And the other one that you mentioned is available here by uploading a data set and merging it. So you can pull in a data set that you have on your computer, and it will just try to match on one of the rows. Very handy. I hope that wasn't too much, but I just wanted to put some context to these two. And I've also linked the relevant help docs there, so you can come back to those and learn more. Okay, back to the Westminster Accounts before we head into our Q&A to learn a little bit more about how exactly you developed it with the Flourish SDK and also what the Flourish SDK is. So the super users among our viewers today may have noticed that the template that is used for the creation of this beautiful Westminster Accounts piece is actually not available in the normal Flourish editor and the Flourish template chooser, which is here. While it looks similar to our packed circles view of our hierarchy template, it's actually not quite the same. The reason you can't see it here is that it's a completely custom developed template that Katie and her team created specifically for this story. So to better understand how that works, let's just look at it in this little flow chart type thing. So the templates that we build kind of for our users as the Flourish team, you'll find those in the template chooser, the one that I was just on before. And you can then create your visuals, create your stories, publish, embed, share, download. But you can also use the Flourish SDK or the Flourish Software Development Kit to create your own templates, which will then show up in your created by me or the mine section of your template chooser or the company section. And anything can be turned into a Flourish template. It's kind of just a way to package some code and create a reusable template. So it could just be a website that you decide you want to publish as a Flourish template, but it can also be something that uses settings and other reusable elements. So here again is where if you were to develop your own templates as a company, they would show up in this company section. And the SDK is available to anyone to use and to create and to publish templates, but they will only be private if you're within a company. So in Katie's case, they built this Westminster Accounts template to use for their story. So it's private to their company, but they could have also publicly published the template. And then once you've kind of created your custom template, you can create visualizations with it just like you would a normal Flourish template or a built by us Flourish template. So it has the same recognizable interface and is accessible to anyone that's within your Flourish company. So up here, we have an example of the Flourish line bar pie template, which is one that we developed as the Flourish team. And down here, we have a little preview of the Westminster Accounts template, which Katie's team developed. So a few more things about the SDK. It enables anyone to create reusable templates for interactive content. They can be private or public, as I mentioned, and it also enables non-developers once they're set up to make and publish visualizations. And as I already mentioned, at Flourish, we use the SDK as well to create the templates that are available in the template chooser. Why use the SDK? Because building everything as a one-off is madness. You want to be able to come back and update things. It also democratizes data design in your organization so that not just developers can update things or reuse the code, but anyone in your organization can go and make changes. And you can also easily publish, download. I believe at Tortoise, it's also handy because Flourish is one of the only kind of embed types that you have whitelisted. Is that right, Katie? So it's a way to embed any interactive content if it's in a Flourish template. And then, as I mentioned, we also have a set of UI components that are available for anyone to use. We call these modules, and they are published to NPM. And we've also, just in time for this webinar, open sourced one of our templates so that you can take a peek at the code and how to structure it and how to use modules. And I've linked that at the end as well. So that was a very fast overview, but I would like to, thought it was important to give that context because it is a special way of using Flourish that kind of goes beyond the off-the-shelf usage of our templates. So now let's take a look at this custom template that you built for this project. I'm just going to jump back into Flourish over here. And this is actually the Flourish editor visualization created with this Westminster Accounts template. Can you maybe walk me through it? What are the different settings that you decided to add? And then we can maybe also take a look at the data tab and how it's linked up to Google Sheets.
Yeah. So I guess it's worth saying here that the SDK is a really, I'll put it this way. News organizations often have really impenetrable content management systems, which make it hard to build anything custom and publish it to a website. So it's hard to create interactive stories and stuff like that. They're often super locked down. And in our case, that is quite true, although it's a little less true. And in Sky News's case, it's really true. And because Sky is also a big Flourish user, we were both able to use Flourish to build this template and then publish it to our websites, which would have otherwise been quite a nightmare, I think, trying to get a custom built asset page onto two separate websites. Like that would have added months onto the project, honestly. So this is to Flourish, and the Flourish SDK is just like a really great sort of backdoor to CMSs and being able to do cool journalism and cool data and visual journalism. So basically, if you look at the template, there's not a lot of settings because this is basically just a story and a little bit of a tool that we built so that we could put in our website. But something, if you go back to the editor, sorry, I was getting there. Something you will notice.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I don't know what I've done.
I think it was in the other tab on that other screen. No, the other. Yeah, and yeah, the copy. Yeah,
got there.
Sorry, I messed you
No,
up.
I'm sorry.
So in the settings there on the right, yeah, so we built two separate skins. So for one of them is because this does live in two separate places. It lives on one on the Tortoise website, and then also lives on the Sky website. And we use different fonts. We use like different color. Like they wanted things in party colors, which we didn't want. So we built two separate skins, which is a setting in Flourish that you could switch between the two. And that made it super simple to just duplicate the visualization so that we could embed it somewhere else. The other things that we have settings are like there's links to
Sorry, just showing how to duplicate a visualization. So you would have created one for Tortoise and then you did one for Sky and you simply just changed the skin here and like republished and then shared that embed code with the Sky team.
Yeah, exactly. So they're both technically on my account in our Flourish company, but we just share the embed codes with Sky, and they're able to publish it to their website because they have a whole Flourish ecosystem. It's it's whitelisted and everything, and then it also made it really simple to do stuff like change the links. So there's a couple of places in the story where we link to a methodology and like corrections and clarifications, credits, and there's two separate versions of all that stuff as well. So making it a setting made it possible to just, you know, duplicate the visualization and then just go in the Flourish editor and change where the links go instead of having to go into the code and change the links, which is quite useful. And then the other settings are just a bit like,
so it's entirely up to you what settings you want to add to a template. In this case, it really is completely bespoke to this story. So everything in the settings is bespoke as well. With the focus on kind of having one skinned for Sky and one for Tortoise. And then is this also the data linked to from the settings, or did you use the data tab?
So because I duplicated it, the data is unlinked now, right?
Yeah.
But the data is would be linked here.
Yeah, usually via this import from URL. So this is all being pulled through. And it looks like you also set up multiple data tabs, which is also possible. You can configure that when building your own template. So here we can see some of that data that's going in. And you created all your custom bindings as well. Awesome. I'm not going to go into detail on the SDK and how to build a template. We did do a webinar on this in the past. We'll make sure and share the link to that one as well in the end resources section. So do check that out if you'd like to learn more about how to build your own templates. Okay. It is the moment we have arrived that everyone has been waiting for, the Q&A. Mathe, tell me.
Yes, I've been gathering the questions in the chat, and we also have a couple on the Q&A button. So thank you. First of all, thank you both for having this conversation. It has been incredibly interesting, and it's just like a ton of work. So congratulations on such a beautiful result and such an important one as well. So I'm just going to go over my notes, and the first one is actually quite short answer, hopefully, which is how far back in time does the data actually go? I think that was one of the first questions that was asked.
Yeah, so the tool itself, the data goes back to December 19th, 2019. I actually might be getting that date slightly wrong. December 13th. It goes back, I think it's the 13th. It goes back, maybe it's the 16th, sorry. It goes back to the beginning of the current parliament, which is like at the end of 2019, which is annoying because we can't say 2020, but yeah, it goes back to then. So everything, we did that basically just so we were sort of comparing apples to apples on the tool. So if someone was in parliament longer than someone else, the numbers would be different, and it wouldn't be across the same time period. So we just cut it off at the beginning of the current parliament. And then we have data that goes back a bit further ourselves, that's less clean, that we use for reporting and stuff like that, and definitely referred to in stories and stuff, but that is not in the public tool. And the public tool only goes to December 2019.
Okay, another data question was actually which sources of data you would have wished to have access that you didn't, if any.
Oh God. I guess the thing about projects like this is that you're only able to sort of explore and show and connect things that people declare. So it makes it, we can't in this project in any sort of way get at, Boris Johnson didn't declare X, Y, and Z interests or whatever. I'm trying not to libel someone right now, but this MP didn't declare interests. We can't there's no way for us to know that because the kind of universe of the data is whatever anybody declares. So that's something that this project doesn't really get at, but obviously is really interesting. Like, what aren't they declaring? If they aren't declaring anything. Yeah, and then there were other things that we didn't put in the tool because they don't really fit, but things like shareholdings, landownings for MPs, ministerial meetings, stuff like that.
Okay, super interesting. I'm going to like mix a couple of questions that I spotted earlier, which was first, what was the impact of the project? Like, do you know if anything in terms of donations has changed? Like, what has been the reaction? And at the same time, whether you've seen impact on the Tortoise side, like, are people visiting the site more? Like, are you getting more traffic because the project was super successful? So I guess impact on two areas.
I don't really know any like numbers, or I'm sure I wouldn't be able to tell you anyway, if I knew like website views numbers and stuff. But I know it had, you know, it drove a lot of traffic to our website. It drove even, obviously Sky News is a much bigger news organization, and so it got many more views there. But yeah, so it drove a lot of traffic to our site. And in terms of the project itself, nothing specific, although I think the thing that a lot of people kind of really latched onto was where there was some sort of memo or something that some parliamentary group of some sort put out about APBGs and how the kind of rules around being in APBGs and how many you can be in. They put out some sort of memo on how they should change those. Not that that has actually happened, but that seemed to be slightly related. I don't know.
Somebody asked, and I think this is quite interesting. Do you know if any other news agencies have used this tool, or has it just, you know, been used by both Sky and yourselves at Tortoise?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the short answer is yes. Specifically, you know, we've seen more local newspapers do their own kind of like roundup of the local MP and stuff like that. And then a lot of other news organizations kind of reported on the data and some of the stories that we did when it launched. But every now and then sometimes I'll see stories where I'm like, how did they count all of that up if they didn't use our tool? Like, did they go through and go through each physical register and count up? I bet they used our tool, which is fair enough, because that's what it's for. So, yeah.
Amazing. Obviously, I'm aware that Flourish is a data visualization tool, so I'm going to now move on to the data visualization questions. One is actually, why did you ultimately decide on bubbles versus the squares when building the visualization? And I find that I want to know the answer to that.
That is a good question. It was, I guess I only showed you previous iterations where they were squares, but there were also a lot of kind of iterations of bubbles. I think the squares was really kind of, I don't want to call it avant-garde, but it was very kind of different in the way that the packing worked and stuff. And I don't think the powers that be liked it that much. But I really liked it. I thought it was cool. And a fun sort of data visualization, you know, fact is that people are better at assessing the size of rectangular object like shapes than they are at circles. So I wanted to do squares. We didn't do squares, but it's also just quite different than, you know, obviously what we did is cool, but it's, you know, you see bubble visualizations a lot. And the squares were different, but maybe, I guess they were too different. I don't know.
Amazing. I'm guessing maybe both Luisa and Katie can answer this one, but somebody was asking about the skills required to use the SDK. And I guess also worth mentioning that the SDK is a free feature, like anybody can actually create with the Flourish SDK. It's just that the templates, if you're not in a company, those templates are going to be public, like available. So, but anybody can get started with our developer documentation, which I've shared in the chat earlier, and we'll make sure to add links to in the email. But yeah, in terms of skills, what can you guys say about that? Like, how can somebody get started with the SDK?
I'll just quickly jump in and point you to this developer documentation here, and also kind of say that it's as easy or as hard as you want it to be, or as your project demands. It can really just be a couple of static files or something that like animates that you just pop into a Flourish template. There's a simple 5-minute template, which is really just kind of adding a couple of bubbles, which we also walked through the creation in our SDK specific webinar. I would say that that's some basic coding skills would be beneficial, but that you can get started very easily, and that we have a couple of examples for you to check out as well. And in fact, we just open sourced one of them today, which is the election results template. It's not even linked here yet. That's how new it is. But it's linked in the slides, and that will also showcase kind of how you can use Flourish modules, which are little bits of code that you can kind of plug in to make use of Flourish functionality that we've made public and free for anyone to use, such as our chart layout module for creating axes and plot backgrounds, or our colors module for creating color palettes. This is all to kind of make it easier for you to build your own templates and plug in the different modules that we work on as a team. And then maybe Katie, you can say a bit more about how experienced or how hard it is to use the SDK as a user of the SDK. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think something really nice about the SDK now is it's quite well documented, which it wasn't for a long time. So if you're just getting started now, there's definitely more documentation for it. So I think it's kind of a good way probably to improve your kind of development skills. If you want to do something slightly different than just building something custom on a page, you can try to make it reusable. And yeah.
So in summary, basic coding skills required. You can make it as easy or as advanced as you would like. You can also use different technologies. They basically just get bundled and output as a reusable template. And we urge you all to try it. Were there any other questions?
I think I can just like ask a very long one, which is about the process of getting the data. So the long question would be, first, how long did they actually take to complete the project? I believe when we were doing the practice session, you mentioned 9 months. So maybe that's going to answer that very quickly. But people were very curious about the data wrangling and the data cleaning. Like, was it super hard? You mentioned that there were a lot of like, manual typing, so lots of errors and issues to go through. And somebody asked about which tools do you use for scraping, specifically for this project?
Yeah, so in short, yes, there's a lot. Me and my colleague Joe wrote both a piece on sort of reflecting on the project, which I can pop in the chat, and then Louisa just popped in the methodology document, which is kind of a short version of a much longer methodology document that we have internally. So that should give you an idea, I guess, of like the complexity, but the entire backend is built in Python. And most of the scraping, I mean, all of the scraping was done in Python. We used a couple of different APIs, and we also scraped some government websites, which is always fun and they don't like very much. And the process was about 9 months, but the project kind of evolved and we kind of added things on. So originally it took maybe half that amount of time, but then we kind of added things on. So we had to add on time. But yeah, about 9 months. Did I answer that? Did I answer that fully?
Yeah, brilliant. I'm conscious of time once again, so I think I'll leave it at that. I think we gathered like 90% of the questions. If you do have any questions, we'll give you our email so you can ask them directly to us here in Flourish. And I guess we can just move on to pretty much the end of the session. I believe Luisa has some resources, so I'll let you share those
Yes.
as well.
Thank you very much. Yes, here are some of the resources. They are all links, so I will let you explore them in your own time. We will be linking these slides from our webinar page. I've included links to the SDK webinar that we did about a year ago, also the developer docs, the public election results template, in case you're curious how the code is structured, etc. when building your own templates. Also linked to the Westminster Accounts, of course, the Flourish Help Docs, and the Flourish blog, where you can get answers to your questions and inspiration, respectively.
Please reach out if you have any questions. Those are our email addresses, specifically for the webinar, and hello@flourish.studio. It's pretty much anything that you want to tell us, feedback, questions, anything and everything. And as always, thank you for joining us and spending this lovely hour with us. Thank you, Katie, so much for joining us as well as our second guest in the Flourish webinar series. And we're incredibly excited to keep welcoming amazing Flourish users and just people sharing their stories. So thanks to you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Katie, and thank you so much to everyone that joined us as an attendee today. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.